This is Tao Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel-Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel-Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to yet another episode of Tao Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host, and today it is my pleasure to host Dr. Yossi Harpaz.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome to our podcast. Dr. Harpaz is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology at Tel-Aviv University. He received his PhD in sociology from Princeton University and then conducted his postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard University. And his research, which is extremely interesting, especially nowadays, is on citizenship, national identity, international migration, and elites. And he wrote a book that was published in 2019 in which he analyzes and discusses three case studies. The first is Israelis who acquire citizenship in European origin countries. The second is Hungarian-speaking citizens of Serbia who obtain a second citizenship from Hungary. And lastly, Mexicans who give birth in the United States so that their children will become American citizens. That's very relevant to what's happening in Israel these days. But before anything, tell us about yourself.
Right. So, first of all, I'm very happy to be here. I'm a senior, as you mentioned already, I'm a senior lecturer here at the Sociology Department. And I got my PhD at Princeton University. I actually got to hear you give a talk when you were the consul in New York.
Oh, wow.
I heard your very interesting talk on, it was, I think, 2013, probably, something like that, 2014 maybe.
I came to Princeton.
Yep. Or, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that visit. Yeah.
So
I think I came to the Wilson Center.
Which is now renamed.
Renamed correctly.
Because they found out that Woodrow Wilson was a racist. So they renamed the center. So I remember your talk about nation branding in Israel and Israel's image. I was actually really, it left a mark on me. It was very interesting.
Thank you. You made my day.
Yeah. And I mean, so maybe I can say that one of the reasons why I found it so interesting, apart from the fact that it's well made and the original argument, and based on research, is that it's really close to the field that I focus on. So I'm really interested. The core of my interest is national belonging, national identity, and its transformations. Right. So, like all of the different manifestations, all of the different aspects of national belonging. When does national belonging become this kind of overpowering sense of obligation? And I started in recent years doing some studies on rituals and symbols and their contribution to national identity. And my research on citizenship looks precisely at these anomalies, right? So people who have more than one citizenship. So they are legally members of more than one nation. But what I found out increasingly through both analysis of statistics and also looking at different case studies is that it's easy to have two citizenships, but it's not so common for people to actually have two national identities or two belongings at the same time.
So citizenship is a mechanical thing, whereas national belonging is an emotional thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
The question is when and how citizenship became a commodity.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big question. Let me think about it for a second.
So I'm assuming it has something to do with the introduction of plenitude and wealth, globalization that allowed us to move from one place to another. Ideas, commodities are moving, services are moving. The introduction of the internet, maybe it had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it's a combination of technology and globalization.
Absolutely. So it's about the economic transformations in recent decades. If I go a little bit further in time, let's say to the middle of the 20th century, if we do a little bit of history, maybe we can suggest something like this. Basically, we have, if we go back, let's say 100 years or 90 years, we are looking at a colonial world, right, where you have a small number of independent countries, and some of them are empires. Most of the European countries are empires, and they have all sorts of colonial possessions, and the US and so on. In the 1950s and 1960s, we have this global decolonization. And many countries that used to be colonial territories, they become sovereign, independent nations. And we have the United Nations, right? So nominally, officially, from the official point of view, from the political point of view, the world is divided into units that each is supposedly sovereign, independent, each is supposedly equal, at least in terms of the UN voting power, and so on. However, if we look at things from an economic perspective, or if we dig into one more thing. So each of these countries has citizenship, right? So if 100 years ago, if you lived in India, you were a subject of the British Empire. Now you have Indian citizenship. If you were a subject of, you were in Kenya and you were a subject of the British Empire, you were in Algeria and you were a subject of the French Empire, and so on. Now we're talking about citizenship in different sovereign nations. However, in terms of the actual value to the individual, especially the economic value, but not just the economic value, and we can talk about other aspects of value of citizenship, it looks like most of these post-colonial countries, they do not provide, let's say, a satisfying package of benefits and rights and opportunities to their citizens. So what we actually get is a hierarchy of citizenship. So we have citizenships that are worth more and citizenships that are worth less. And we see a huge movement around the world for people trying to appropriate, basically, to get access to these high-value citizenships. One way is migration, and these different citizenship schemes, dual citizenship, citizenship by investment, giving birth, and so on. These are also another set of strategies where people from the less developed countries try to access this wealth of opportunities and rights and territorial access and freedom of movement that come with Western citizenship.
Now, before the rise of nation state, people used to migrate because of usually economic reasons or water. There was lack of water, for example, the Jews that left Eastern Europe and moved to North America. The motivation was mostly because of the poverty and the pogroms, right? But they didn't come here. They didn't come to Palestine. Most of them, over 2 million, went to North America, and I think only tens of thousands came to what was then the Holy Land. And the question is, once citizenship becomes a tool of migration, right? It becomes a double-edged sword. Because it could, some countries that open themselves to for example, Portugal or other countries, or Greece, or all of a sudden can find themselves in a situation that is not the original intent.
Right. So let's think of it as a kind of a market. So in my previous answer, I described the demand side, right? This is the demand side. We have, if we look at the world, it's over 8 billion people. About 1 billion, they hold citizenship in an EU country or the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. And these people, they're not, most of them usually, are not looking for any other help in the field of citizenship. They are mostly satisfied with their citizenship. Not all of them. I mean, maybe we can talk about it later. American Jews have actually, since 2008, have been really interested in getting all sorts of European citizenships. So it is changing a little bit. But basically, if you're in the developed world, you're fine. If you are one of the 7.5 billion humans that were not fortunate enough to be born with this top-tier citizenship, then the demand is there. You may want, you want to access some part of this Western wealth. it doesn't mean that everybody would, that if borders were open, everybody would emigrate tomorrow. There are many other reasons, personal reasons, economic reasons, family reasons, health, and so on that prevent people from emigrating. However, the basic demand is there. Okay, so this is the first step. The second step is, okay, so I'm a rich country. I'm Portugal, a member of the EU, or I'm Canada. And now I have this incredible luxury of setting up programs that try to select the people that I want. And I know that whatever program I set up, I'm probably going to find some people who are interested in buying what I'm selling, if I can call it like this, right? So a country like Canada can just post on a website. They can post a list of the jobs that they need people to fill. And you will get, they need the nurses, and then you will have,
they need the nurse in Calgary, not in Toronto.
Exactly. And then you will have 5,000 applications from the Philippines and India for people who are eager to do this. So Western countries have discovered that they have this incredible resource, that they can do things with their citizenship, do things with their residence visas. And precisely countries like Greece or Portugal, that are the less wealthy among the wealthy nations, that have high value citizenship, but not all of it is because they are so industrially advanced. A big part of it is because they are members of the EU. So they were like, okay, here's a resource that we can use. Here is something we can capitalize on.
Now let's talk about the book that you published in 2019 and the 3 case studies. What can we learn from each and every one of them? So we'll start with the Israelis.
Right. So first of all, why did I, carry out these 3 studies? Because I wanted to show that this phenomenon of the eagerness of people from outside the West and the EU to acquire dual citizenship, that this is something that you will see across different continents, cultures, relationships between countries, and so on. And even Israel is a highly economically developed country. Nevertheless, we see this high demand. So that's why I was looking at 3 very different cases. Okay, now what do we learn from them? Israel. So I was looking, I did my research in around 2013, 14, 15. So this was before the Spanish and Portuguese passports became available. So I was focusing on people who had direct ancestry from Central and Eastern European countries, so people who could get German passports, Polish, Romanian, and so on. And the main thing that I found, I found 2 main reasons for why people acquired this citizenship. One was the insurance policy, and this was, people would speak about it, saying the way of discussing this, they said, I'm not sure that Israel is going to survive.
So that's the doomsday scenario.
Absolutely. And the second one, even more surprising, was status symbol. So people really enjoyed talking about their passports, using the shorter line when you arrive in a European country. If you can use the shorter line for passports, then even though it saves only 5 or 10 minutes, people enjoy it, because these kind of situations where there is one line that goes faster, where you are being asked less questions or not being asked any questions at all, this is where people feel their sense of high status. So in Israel, this played a big role. But insurance is the biggest.
So you would say, from a sociological point of view, it corresponded with the deep-seated anxiety that exists in Israel about our very existence, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, when I was interviewing people, they would mention all sorts of specific reasons. So some people would speak about Iran, some people would speak about the conflict with the Palestinians. Some of my respondents who were more left-leaning, so they said, "Oh, I'm afraid of religious right-wing fascists taking over the country." So the specific threat changed, but the sense that we should have another place to go if we have to, that was the shared element.
Did you at all? Because I haven't read the book, I just read about it. did you at all look at it from a historical perspective? Because this has always been the case in Israel. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest wave of people leaving Israel was after 1948, proportionately speaking. A big chunk of the population left because of the war, because of the devastation of the war, because of the economic recession. And then another big wave after 73, another big wave after 82, and probably after 10/7 too.
Okay, so you're bringing up the whole subject of post October 7th immigration. So, okay, first of all, I want to say that in the years that when I was carrying out the research on dual citizenship, there was actually no correlation between the acquisition of passports and immigration. So tens of thousands of people, of Israelis, have acquired passports.
But they stayed here.
We didn't see any increase in immigration. Of course, they were thinking about the insurance policy, the exit option, and so on. And it is doubtless that first of all, of course, we see an increase in immigration in starting in 2023. And of course, some of it is facilitated by people having dual citizenship. So absolutely, there is a connection. We still don't know how many people are emigrating. I mean, one reason that we don't know is that it's hard to collect statistics on this. Another reason that we don't know is that reality has not yet been decided. So people who might have left in October or November, some of them, they just left without planning, without looking for a job and so on. They're kind of like waiting to see what happens. And I would say that there's also tens of thousands of people in Israel who are kind of waiting to see what happens. How will the war end? Will there be any elections soon? If there are elections, what kind of government is elected? And what will happen with the North? I think a lot of people, a lot of Israelis, both here and abroad, are kind of in a expecting, waiting phase. They're still unsure.
So let me ask you this, because it's very important based on your analysis. So do you see a correlation between the level of attractiveness of a place, let's say Israel or other countries, when their places are being perceived as attractive, and the value of their citizenship? In other words, if Israel is not going to be viewed by its, let's say, its younger generation as an attractive place, the value of its citizenship will go down in the eyes of its own citizens.
Absolutely. This is what we're talking about. So we're talking about a kind of a global hierarchy of citizenship that ranks citizenships. And even though most people have never studied the GDP per capita or the human development index of different countries, people have a sense of what's going on, right? They know that of course, everybody knows that having German citizenship is better than citizenship of the Central African Republic, but people even have a higher resolution view of this, and of course, it's dynamic. So events really change the perception of the value of citizenship. We have a very striking example from 2022, right? There were it's probably hundreds of thousands of people, maybe even over 1 million, who have left Russia very quickly. Many of them when Russia invaded Ukraine. Many of them were living in Moscow, having middle class, even upper middle class professions, working in high tech. For them until February 2022, Russia was okay for them. It was fine. Maybe they weren't happy about the authoritarian regime, but economically and socially, it was fine for them. And then overnight, it changed. So absolutely, these kind of things does happen. I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we'll get there so quickly. I mean, I definitely hope we won't, but this is something that can happen.
Now, what can we learn from the Serbian-Hungarian case?
Serbian-Hungarian case is complex because we're talking about an ethnic minority, right? So basically, the north of Serbia is ethnically diverse. It's a region called Vojvodina, and it has all sorts of different ethnicities. And the biggest minority group is the ethnic Hungarians, who have been part of Serbia or Yugoslavia since World War One. These are territories that used to belong to Hungary until the end of World War One. And then basically what you see is that once communism is over, this kind of, we call this irredentism. So this is when you have a nationalist movement that is saying, we are not satisfied with the borders of our countries. Some other territories outside our borders should also belong to us. Some other people who are outside our borders are our ethnic brethren, and we should expand to include them. So this was kind of suppressed in Hungarian politics during communism, and then it started growing after the end of communism until in 2011, Viktor Orban, who is still the Prime Minister of Hungary, he changed the law, basically offering dual citizenship to any ethnic Hungarian, I'll clarify this in a second, to any ethnic Hungarian living in the vicinity. So you have Hungarian minorities in Serbia, in Romania, in Slovakia, in Ukraine, and he wanted to offer them a dual citizenship, basically creating a kind of soft expansion, right? The Hungarian army did not invade any of those countries. He did not threaten to take over these territories where the Hungarians are, but, reaching out to them, giving them citizenship, encouraging them to vote, encouraging them to, helping them have Hungarian language education, all of the things that we are, that are part of like nurturing an ethno-national identity, only outside Hungary's borders.
So it was like a silent appropriation.
Absolutely.
Very similar to what happened between the U.S. and Canada back in the 1970s in the places that are along the border. Because of healthcare issues, many Canadians gave birth in American hospitals. It was convenient, and their children were American citizens.
So they actually preferred the American healthcare.
Yes, which still is superior to the Canadian healthcare until this very day, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, they really did their number on their healthcare in Canada.
So to get back to the interesting part, the interesting thing is, and this is a big part of what I studied, was that you could basically, how do you define Hungarians? A lot of social science issues, it's all about the definitions, right? Like we have in Israel, for example, the law of return, which, gives any Jew the right to immigrate to Israel, to get citizenship. But it's all about how do you define? And we've had some very serious controversies in the 50s and 60s.
Also, the citizenship law is modeled after the law of return. It goes 2 generations back to define who is a citizen. So you can be an Israeli by birth without even being born in Israel.
Right. One generation, I think. Like...
If 1 or 2, maybe I'm wrong, but it's modeled after the same idea of the law of return. That's why it's so difficult to answer the question, who's an Israeli abroad?
What do you mean?
It's very difficult. If you're, there are many Israelis that never exercised their right or duty to issue an Israeli ID card or even an Israeli passport. And we discovered that during COVID, when many people wanted to enter Israel, and they couldn't because they never reported the birth of their children to the Israeli authorities.
Interesting. So these are like second generation Israeli Americans.
Second and third. So we had a huge problem. But that's, we can have a whole podcast about that. Okay, so
back to the Serbia-Hungary case. So what happened was, it's all about the definitions, as I said. So Hungary, in Central and Eastern Europe, everybody knows what ethnicity you are, right? It's a bit similar to Jews and Arabs in Israel. It's different names, different religion, different mother tongue. There are specific areas where that the people who live there, villages and so on, are Hungarian in Serbia. But the Hungarian government could not use these criteria because then they would be accused of discriminating. So basically what they said is, If you want to get the citizenship, you need to prove that you are descended from a subject of the Kingdom of Hungary, which existed until World War I, but was ethnically diverse. There were also Serbs, Croats, Jews, Romanians, Ukrainians, and so on. And you need to show that you can speak Hungarian. You have to file your application in Hungarian. You have to speak with the clerk in Hungarian. And what happened was that many people in Serbia who are ethnic Serbs, who have no connection, I mean, their great-grandparents were subjects of Hungary, but that doesn't mean that they were ethnically Hungarian. Many of these people, they said, okay, this is a great opportunity to get European citizenship. And they started studying Hungarian just in order to get the citizenship. So they were strategically manipulating one characteristic of their identity in order to become eligible for dual citizenship, which was interesting for them because it was EU. They did not care about Hungary, and those who got it did not go to Hungary. They would go to Sweden or Germany or Austria to look for a job. So this is actually very interesting, and I'm always very interested in the cases where you have unintended consequences, where you define one set of criteria and then people find a way around it.
Which leads us to the third example of Mexicans giving birth to their children in the United States. It's a huge political issue these days in the United States in election season.
Yeah. So this is another very classic case of strategically manipulating your characteristics. So this principle of whoever is born on U.S. soil is automatically a citizen. This has been like a main principle of American citizenship for a long time. It's not unique to the U.S. I mean, most countries in the Western Hemisphere, they have this principle. And it makes a lot of sense when transport is complicated and costly. So child born in the U.S., of course, the assumption is that the parents are immigrants in the U.S. and they want to keep living there. Okay. So this is the expected situation. What we have now is that people are coming from Mexico, which is close, but also from much, much farther locations. Actually, the biggest number of people who practice this kind of birth tourism, as it is called sometimes, are Chinese.
Wow.
And there's also Russians, there's Turks, there's Nigerians, there's people from many, many developing countries that go there, they give birth in the US, and then they return to their countries. And they're actually quite similar to the Israelis with the European passports, because these are mostly people who don't want to immigrate to the US, right? Because
they just want to have the insurance policy.
Exactly. And they just go there. They can spend $7,000 up to $50,000 or $60,000 on getting this procedure. And then they just do it because they want their kids to have an extra citizenship, and which again shows us this hierarchy of citizenships, right? So this is something that elites tend to do. This is something that's a relatively elite thing. And I can tell you that in the Mexican case I studied, I actually was based in a city in northern Mexico called Monterrey, which is 3 hours drive from the U.S. border. So the rich families of Monterrey, they would just go there and do it, and it's relatively easy, and they would just pay for the cost of the birth. Often they also had relatives if they needed to stay on the U.S. side of the border. For Chinese or Russians, it's much more complicated. You also cannot fly, right? A woman cannot fly 2 weeks before birth. So they have actually a huge industry. There are these maternity homes for Chinese mothers on the U.S. West Coast, in California, in Washington State, and so on. And they would go there, let's say, on their 7th month, and they would spend the last month or 6 weeks in these maternity homes, and they would pay for a package that also includes shopping and the conditions. And also in Chinese tradition, the mother is supposed to spend a month resting after birth. So they would pay for this luxurious package and pay $50,000 or $60,000. And what is actually remarkable is that, in China, citizenship is not it doesn't give you all the rights. If you want to have, there is something called hukou, which is kind of like an urban citizenship. So let's say you live in Shanghai, you can live there as a Chinese citizen, but you don't automatically get all of the rights and privileges that go with it. For example, you cannot, just if you just moved to Shanghai from a village, you cannot send your kids to the school there, right? You cannot necessarily get medical attention at the highest level.
There's a domestic hierarchy of residency.
Exactly. So it turns out it's actually cheaper to spend $50,000 or $70,000 on getting a U.S. Citizenship for the child than to get a Beijing or Shanghai hukou for some of these Chinese families. So it's actually quite
Amazing.
Remarkable.
Well, listen, Dr. Harpaz, this is such a fascinating topic because what you're teaching us is something critical. You're telling us that there is not necessarily a correlation between the acquisition of citizenship and actual migration. And that's a very important distinction to make because I think that out there, that's the prevailing assumption, that people acquire citizenship because they want to migrate. But what you're saying, no, there's so many other things. And this is exactly why we need social scientists like you to teach us about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For visiting with us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to have you again and talk about your next book.
Thank you so much.
And your previous book is definitely going to be included in my bibliography list, for sure.
Great. Thank you.
And to our viewers and listeners back home, goodbye from Tel Aviv until our next episode.